Now, do you think it's possible to have a debate about immigration, about these incredibly controversial issues without getting carried away with emotions? That's what we're going to try and do here, just looking at the numbers. I've got so many charts here, just trying to tell you the picture of what's going on with migration, and we'll just try and get a few through some of them. This is starting with the big picture. This is basically showing you how many people are coming into the country, that's immigration, and how many people are going out. And we've got it going back to 2012 here. And when people talk about net migration, what do they mean? They basically mean they take that bit away from that bit. So a number of people leaving away from the number of people coming in, and you get a net figure. It's usually positive, or at least it's positive in recent years, but sometimes it can be negative as well. And that number is up to, or at least it was up to a few years ago, 2023, it was up to about 900,000. And when you think back a few years to when David Cameron was talking about bringing it down into the tens of thousands, well, we are so far beyond that. And it's worth just saying, although it looks like it's coming down, worth treating that with a little bit of caution, because these numbers get revised quite a lot. They're provisional, at least. The last few quarters are provisional. But a bit of context here, OK? So if we take that line and work out what it is as a percentage of the population, it's about 1.25% of the population. When in history have we had flows of net migration that have been as high as that? Well, the short answer is basically never. And I can tell you that because we can look back, not just as far as this chart goes, but we can look back all the way to, believe it or not, all the way to 1541, the Tudor era. And this is showing you how many people are leaving the country or indeed coming in. It's net migration going back all of that period. Most of this covers England, and then you've got the UK in the more recent years there, in the last century and a half or so. And what do you notice? You notice that for most of English history, at least, more people were leaving than coming in. But you also notice this. If we bring on the latest figures I just showed you a moment ago here, that's your 1.25% of the population. And we have never seen anything like that. Going back to the era of Henry VIII, we have never seen net migration as high as it has been in the last few years. It's kind of flabbergasting, really. And it's worth just saying, what are the reasons that led to this unprecedentedly high number here? Well, partly it's this. Post-Brexit rules that came into place. This is just showing you net migration for different parts of the world. So the light blue line is EU migration. A lot of people coming in from the EU previously, or at least we thought that was a high number back in the day. Then you've got non-EU there. New rules came in. They made it easier for non-EU people to come into the UK. They made it easier for students to come into the UK. And just look at what happened. So EU migration went down very fast. Non-EU immigration went through the roof. And what the UK essentially was doing in that moment there where the rules came in was it was swapping relatively high levels of EU immigration with really high levels of non-EU migration. Now, what kind of migration are we talking about here? If we go back to the first chart and just focus on the immigration kind of bar, we can break it down. So let's break that down. And by the way, before we get any further, because it's probably one of these questions you're wondering to yourself, given how much it's in the headlines, how much of this is accounted for small boats? All those pictures of small boats we see all the time, how much of it is small boats? Short answer, not all that much. So 43,000, or just over 43,000 in the most recent year, was small boat arrivals. And of that total, it's about 4.8%, so under 5%. The vast majority of this is legal migration. It's legal migration. It's a result of government policy. And if we break down this chart into where people are coming from, what they are doing, the majority of it is actually students. So it's student visas coming into the UK, but you've also got people coming into work, and we'll look at that in a second. But when it comes to students, and those, by the way, are the other routes, so you can see much smaller, small boats there, much smaller, asylum seekers much smaller. But when it comes to students, that dominates everything. And that's relevant because when you look at who's coming in to study, there's an interesting wrinkle in recent years. So what this is showing you is the number of people who come in to study in the UK. This is people who came in 2019 and then switch onto other visas and basically start to work. And that's what happened in 2019. It wasn't that high. But in each year that went by, more people coming into the UK, registering as students, and then suddenly they switch onto different visas. And so what look like student visas aren't necessarily, because here, Year 2, 2019 cohort, 20% of them get new visas. The 2022 cohort, 59%, almost 60% of them get new visas and go on largely to work. So there's that student side of things. Are people getting into the country nominally to be students, but then very quickly going on to work? It looks like it, and we're starting to see that in the figures. And then you've got the question of what jobs people are doing when they're coming in officially on those work visas. And it's often the way, isn't it? Politicians say, look, I'm in favour of migration as long as it's skilled migration. Well, is that what we're getting right now? This is skilled workers, and we're going back again here, the last few years here. There's temporary workers, so they're less skilled workers. What's striking here is during the pandemic, that's just other skilled workers, and that's health and care. Look at how high health workers, that's nurses, social care workers, look how high that got just in the wake of the pandemic. But even more strikingly, look at how much it's come down. So that's come down so much now that although there's been all this focus on skilled workers and skilled visas, actually temporary work visas are higher than those courses, those routes into the country. Now, small boats, I mentioned a moment ago, it's worth just kind of going through and working out how we compare this year with previous years, because although it's a small fraction of that overall total, it's certainly not nothing. It's certainly not nothing. And if you look at this year in particular, we're talking about a higher profile. This is all this is doing, just looking at cumulative numbers of people coming through on small boats. We're higher this year than we have been in any previous year, so far at least. And we'll see how that traces over the course of the next few weeks and months. But this is not just a UK story, OK? So you've got incredibly high numbers of asylum seekers, not just in the UK, but around the developed world as a whole. The OECD, that's kind of rich countries here. And we're showing here the number of asylum seekers going back to the 1980s, and just look at how much it's peaked in recent years. And it's not just Europe, although it's tempting to think this is just a European story, given that we know this is happening across Europe. Actually, the European level is a little bit lower than it was back in 2014. What's really changed is the US. So it's the southern border of the US and an incredibly tall spike there in America. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But just remember, this is not just a UK-specific story. We're seeing flows of migrants around the world due to all sorts of factors. And again, it's tempting to believe, the UK is facing it more than other countries. That's certainly the case when it comes to overall migration. So that's overall migration. The UK, one of the biggest in terms of seeing immigrants into the UK. Looking at student migration, the UK is the biggest. So more immigrants coming across to the UK to study than any other country around the world. But now watch that red bar and we'll look at asylum seekers. Look at that. So although the UK has lots of official legal migrants, although it has lots of students coming in to study from abroad, actually, this bar is still higher than it's been for some years, but it's lower than many other countries around the world. Italy, France, Canada, Spain, Germany, or the US. So worth just bearing that in mind. And if you look at just the number of asylum seekers in the UK as a percentage of the population, that's still comparatively low compared with other countries. It's kind of about 1 in 800. That's up considerably on where it was a few years ago, but nonetheless, 1 in 800, much lower than, for instance, in somewhere like Iceland, which is 1 in 94, and all these other countries, more asylum seekers per head of the population than in the UK. But one thing that definitely has changed recently is the likelihood, if you're an asylum seeker, the likelihood that you will be granted permission to stay. And this is basically showing you that. The change in the likelihood of asylum seekers getting permission to stay in the country, the UK has got higher than most other countries around the world, 600% up in terms of approvals to remain in Britain. And you see that kind of in another kind of form here. This is showing you the percentage of people who are returned. So asylum seekers who come in the country and then get told they have to leave. You've got the percentage that are bailed and so can essentially stay on at least temporarily in the country. Well, look at that light blue section. As a percentage of the total, the percentage of people who get bailed has gone up from 35% in 2011 to 51% in 2025. So that's going up, and it's obviously you have COVID there, but it's been gradually getting higher. It's not just a recent thing. So you've been more likely to be able to stay on in the UK if you're an asylum seeker. And the upshot of that is that gradually the proportion of people in the UK who are asylum seekers has gone up. It's mounted to the extent that now we're talking about 100, kind of give or take 125,000 people kind of waiting basically to have their cases heard in the UK. That is about the size of Cambridge. So although the absolute numbers are relatively small each year, certainly in comparison with that enormous legal migration figure, this is swelling. And so people are right to be, to notice it and to be concerned about it. Final thing to say, I mentioned America just a moment ago, and it's worth just looking at the numbers there because they are really striking. This is showing you just people coming in across the southern border of the US. You've got the Obama administration here, Trump, and then Biden. And look at how that spiked during the Biden administration. And, for all that is incredibly controversial, one thing that Donald Trump certainly seems to have done is to bring those numbers down. So look at that line. Under Donald Trump in his second presidency, it's come down to close to zero, underlining the fact that, while a lot of people say it might be impossible to stop the small boats, there is one person that has so far managed to bring those numbers down, albeit with quite a lot of controversy.